Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to our random review. Today's random review comes from 1971, and it's Sacco and Vanzetti by Giuliano Montaldo, starring Gian Maria Volonte, Riccardo Cucchiaiani, that's not his name, Cucciola, Cyril Cusack, Jeffrey Keane, who you'll know his face if you don't know his name, Milo Shea, you know his face if you don't know his name, William Prince, you know his face if you don't know his name, and Claude Mann, you know his face if you don't know his name. And this is based on the true story of two Italian immigrants in Boston or Massachusetts in 1920 who were arrested for robbery and murder under the guise of trying to squash socialism and anarchy in the immigrant community by the powers that be, and their subsequent trial. This is a fairly famous case, even though I hadn't really been aware of it before. That just shows my ignorance. The film was scored by Ennio Morricone, and Joan Baez sings 3 songs during the film, including the classic "Here's to You" over the end credits, which I made the mistake of thinking about Morricone while that was playing, and ended up blubbing like a small child. The score is quite quiet in places and just sets the tone, and we have Baez's 3 songs, one in the opening credits, one in the end credits, and one near the end of the film, and you do feel they would have actually been better if they'd been sung in Italian. Some of the phrasing in English, I think it sounds like it should have really been sung in Italian, but that's a minor quibble. It's another one of Morricone's just wonderful scores, and it's a score, certainly Here's to You, that I've had on various Morricone compilations for years without actually have seen the film, which is the case with quite a few Morricone scores. Stuff like, Petrie's Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion. I've had that theme tune in my collection a lot longer than I've actually seen the film. Same with Petrie's Working Class Go to Heaven or Lulu the Tool. Like I say, it stars Volonte as Vanzetti, and he is the quieter of the two. He's the more solemn of the two. He does have a couple of Volonte eruptions during speeches where his face goes red, which are just fantastic. But for most of the film, he's just burning with intensity with those amazing Volonte eyes. Riccardo Cucciola, he plays Sacco. He's much more emotional, and playing these two guys who pretty obviously didn't do these crimes. The film opens in black and white, and we see a police raid on a mainly Italian community, and this was instigated by a politician called Palmer, who, again, to get public support, just basically wanted to show him crushing the anarchists, immigrants and foreigners. Again, it's always funny when politicians in America talking about getting rid of immigrants and deporting immigrants, because if they deported all the immigrants there'd be nobody left, because only people left, they murdered most of them. So it's still a relevant film. So obviously immigration in a lot of countries is still a political hot potato. During the trial, the prosecution, led by Cyril Cusack, who is an actor who generally plays kind of nice English chaps, plays a fairly nasty prosecutor who's basically trying to railroad these two characters. And of course they criticise Sacco, who's a shoemaker by trade, and Vanzetti, who is a fishmonger by trade, for wanting to come to America to make money, and they criticise him for that. And it's like, well, that's what America's built on, is capitalism. And then they're criticising these immigrants for actually wanting to come to America to make a better life for themselves and have more money, and they're using that against them. So the black and white sequence at the start is very brutal, as families are, their windows are smashed and they're dragged from their houses and rounded up. And then we cut to colour and we see a body being thrown from a building. Obviously it looks like a dummy, but we'll suspend our disbelief. And that is one of the people who are thrown out of the building. And then Volonte, or Sacco and Vanzetti, Sorry, I keep calling him Zanetti for some reason. Vanzetti are arrested, and then they're somehow put in for this robbery and murder that happened at a factory. And the prosecution brings out all these witnesses, but it's very nicely done by Montaldo, as we see flashbacks of the witnesses' view, and it's kind of blurry, which sort of suggests that they didn't actually see or had trouble remembering what they'd actually seen. But of course all these witnesses are kind of trumped out in court, saying that it was definitely these two men that did the robbery and murder of the guards. Milo O'Shea plays the defence attorney, and again the character actors O'Shea and Jeffrey Keane, who plays the judge, they're always like, well, in Keane's case he's always like the fourth officer down in like military films, but he actually gets a chance to chew some scenery and have some fun shouting matches with the lawyers when he plays the judge. And again, Milo O'Shea, who generally just gets tiny little parts, he plays the defence attorney with gusto as well. Again, you can look up the details of the case, as I did after I watched the film, on Wikipedia or whatever. So they were found guilty, and then the film follows their appeals, but you can probably guess how those appeals went as well. I don't think this is spoiler territory. And William Prince, again, another guy who you'll recognise his face but maybe not his name. He is a much more famous lawyer, and he gets involved in the appeals, as he and Claude Mann, who's a reporter who ends up getting fired for reporting that maybe the case was a little bit not fair, they kind of track down witnesses and other people who claim to have done the robbery themselves, who may or may not be telling the truth. So the kind of second half of the film is about that as well. We also we cut in newsreel footage because there was like huge rallies around the country and eventually around the world. Apparently Mussolini put pressure on the US to kind of squash the conviction. So we get the kind of historical background, we get newsreel footage, we see the characters being shown the newsreel in a kind of made up cinema, and it becomes like a huge political thing of, you know, let's squash socialism and these anarchists. But again, it's mainly just to look good to your voters and get a boost for your voters. It's just, you know, it's not a perfect film. Again, it's maybe a little bit too long. Again, a large part of it is in courtroom, and it's very difficult to make courtroom scenes kind of look good. But again, when you have Volonte basically burning holes in the celluloid, and when he does speak, he does have some really good speeches about, you know, capitalism and socialism. And Cucciola has a wonderful speech, you know, about working for a living and actually, and again, when that point of you came to America to make money, how dare you? And it's like, yeah, that's what America's built on. That's the mantra of America, is you're more worthwhile if you actually get more money, and the more money you are, the more important you are, and the better human being you are because you've got money. And chastising them for wanting to make money and, you know, provide for their family. I mean, obviously with Joan Baez's inclusion in the songs, obviously the film comes at the subject from a specific point of view, even though it is fairly obvious that they didn't have anything to do with the crimes, and it wasn't until 1977 where the American authorities actually went, yeah, the trial was unfair and the conviction and sentence was unfair as well. Hope to do that really helps the two men and their families. And again, it's just depressing because these things happen all the time in different countries all around the world, and nothing's ever really learned from it, and we just keep repeating the same things over and over again. There's been countless books written about the case. In 1960, American television did a 2-part miniseries starring Martin Balsam as Sacco, I believe. Then the BBC in the 60s did The Good Shoemaker and the Poor Fish Peddler, which is a really snappy title. There was a 2006 documentary which featured the voices of John Turturro and Tony Shalhoub as they read out letters from the two men to their families. It is another wonderful Italian film by a director that I had no idea about. But again, I have a rule: I see Volonte, I buy Volonte, and he doesn't disappoint. His last scene is really powerful, and again, he doesn't really say much. He is all burning intensity. You can see in the back there, that image, that's total Volonte. This is a Kino Lorber Region A Blu-ray. The film looks really good. And this one has the bonus of having a commentary by Alex Cox, which I've listened to half of, and I will go and listen to the other half, because as always, Alex Cox is fascinating. I think he's on Lucky Luciano by Francesco Rossi as well. I think he's on Illustrious Corpses. I think he is on Illustrious Corpses by Rossi, which is another masterpiece. Yeah, if you're a fan of Volonte, it's an absolute essential one. Again, it's a true story, so there's only like so much you can do. Again, whether it's 100% factual or not, I'm not quite sure. Like I said, I'm ignorant of the story. And obviously the Morricone score, which again at times is really delicate and it's just in the background and you don't really notice it too much. But again, that final "Here's to You," and if you try not to think about Morricone when that song appears, you should have dry eyes. But again, that's a perfect example of it's a simple repeated lyric, but Morricone just ramps up, and then he hits that Morricone note that just has an emotional resonance with you. Well, with me certainly. It's just another wonderful Italian film that I wasn't aware of. Another Italian filmmaker that I wasn't aware of, that I'll have to try and see a bit more of the work. I mean, directorily, it is kind of more a meat and potatoes film. You know, the initial raid in black and white is kind of docudrama. The last scenes also in black and white, again, are kind of documentary shot, or look like documentary shot. But it's another really good film. A film with, like I said, I listed those kind of character actors who usually get small parts, but really get to shine in meatier roles. There is an Italian. I watched it with Italian track, so I could see Volonte speaking Italian, but there are swathes of, obviously there's American actors, British actors, and they speak English. But I always like to watch the film in the language of the filmmaker or the star. So I watched it in Italian. It's got English subtitles, but there's also an English dub on the Kino Lorber release as well, if you prefer that. So that's Sacco and Vanzetti. Another wonderful Volonte performance and another wonderful little Italian film. So this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell. You can let me know in the comments below what you think of the film, and hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. Cheerio.